Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so excited today to be joined by Rebecca Dayan, currently starring in the Netflix series Halston. And I wanted to talk a little bit about your research in developing playing Elsa Peretti in the series, because there's obviously a huge amount of footage of her and interviews with her, but it's very much from more recent years than where we meet her in the series. And so what was your process of really diving into a lot of the archival material and figuring out some of the essence of who she was in many ways from that, even though you were looking at later footage?
Yeah, so like you said, there's not so much video footage of her or interviews of her when she's, because when the series starts, she's Elsa's, I think, 20, in her mid 20s, and we go all the way through later on, like almost, I think, 40 or 41 years old she is at the end. So this is all before any recorded footage that I had a chance to see. So I used some of that because obviously, she's still the same. She was still the same person, but obviously you move differently, you speak a little differently, and in that, I think Dan, the director, was really helpful with all. He has so much resources. He's collecting all these magazines from the time and had all these books that he shared with all of us, not just me. I think Ewan and Krista and David and Gianfranco all had, we all had the opportunity to get our hands on some material that I don't know how else I would have been able to find that otherwise. So yes, from interviews of her in paper, but also from what other people said about her, whether it's Joe Eula or Joe spoke a lot about Elsa in the documentary. Also, he talks about Elsa and Halston's relationship, and so I think I grasped from all these different outlets, like bits and pieces from this interview from Vogue or Interview Magazine, or this book, but Bob Colacello's book has a lot of, stories and little fun facts or things that happened where he was there and all of that. So that, I think, was where some of the information that I got came from. And yeah, and just reading about her life in general.
Yeah. And I know that you were working with a dialect coach as well for the series. And how specifically were you thinking about her accent, not just in terms of where she grew up, but also whether there would be any influence and impact from the time that she'd spent in America, and maybe it would have softened it a little bit as well. And just overall how you wanted her to speak as a character throughout the show as well.
Yes. So I think again, there's this amazing interview of her for Tiffany's. I think it's called 15 of my 50, and I think when she turned 50 years old and had spent 15 years working at Tiffany's. And I got a lot from that, and that interview I was always listening to just to kind of get the cadence and her rhythm and all of that. But it almost seems to me that at that point she wasn't really living in New York anymore, and her accent was really, really strong in that. And I think I kind of wanted to soften that a little bit, because I thought, when you're immersed and you live in New York, speaking English all the time, mostly surrounded by people speaking in English, your accent kind of softens a little bit. And so, yes, I worked with a coach who's not exactly a coach. He's a playwright and an actor and a director, and is a really good friend of Dan. And so he introduced us, and I started working a little bit with him. And also my best friend here in New York City is a fashion designer, and she's from Rome. And she kind of comes from a similar background to Elsa. So even though, obviously expressions in 2020 or 2021 and expressions back in, the 60s, 70s, and 80s are very different, but still I would, kind of secretly record her while we would be having coffee and used some of that. And then, I don't know, just kind of some of it from what I imagined that she would sound like and, move like.
Well, with the movement as well, I'm so interested in how you figured out a lot of those details, because it's everything from when she's sitting on a couch, she doesn't disappear into the couch. There's still always an element of poise to the way that she holds her body and the way that her muscles would have been structured from that. And then down to the way that she wears the clothes and the fabric and really moves within them and feels the essence of the design. And so was that something that you figured out before you arrived on set, or were those elements and aspects that you figured out once you were playing her and once you were filming her?
I think it came, I mean, there was obviously, I had an idea that, she comes from this very, upper class background. So obviously she has a certain way of holding herself. But I think it just came while we were filming, being in the clothes, being, around everybody else, that kind of, it just happened, I think, in a way. I don't know that I thought about it, obviously, but I think at one point it was kind of like this unconscious thing of, you hold yourself differently. I mean, hair, makeup, and wardrobe really helps with that. Like once you're in costume, you just don't have to think about it so much.
Yeah. And you just mentioned her upbringing a little bit. And, the very first detail that we ever hear anyone else speak of her in the script is about coming from a family with wealth and stepping away from all of that and leaving all of that behind and not being close to her family anymore. And did you think about whether you wanted that to influence the way that she has a relationship and dynamic with Halston, and the fact that in essence, they become an element of chosen family to each other at all?
Yeah, I think that's just a natural thing that, obviously, cutting ties with your family and looking for, approval or belonging, you kind of, you move away, you that's what you do. You find your own chosen family. And I think, her and that whole group was like that for one another, for sure. But definitely her and Halston definitely had that really strong bond where they were, kindred spirits. They really recognized one another, I think, and they pushed each other. And he was the first person to, believe in her and push her to go forward with her designs, and included her in, in the brand and all of that. She's a little bit more than a muse or than a model, definitely more than a model. And I think they, had, they were really, really, according to, I think, Joel Eula, they were really, really needy of each other's attention all the time. So I think they had that type of relationship. And I don't know if, it's because she didn't get that from her father, or, I think it really, she talks about how her father cutting her off, or her, cutting ties with her family, was definitely a hard thing. And you can sense that she doesn't mention her mother as much as she mentions her father, at least not that I know of. So, maybe Halston became this sort of mentor, father figure kind of for her, but also they had they were almost in love with each other in a very usual way of being in love with each other.
And you just mentioned that he was one of the first people to believe in her, but also retroactively, she was one of the very first people to believe in him, and was one of the first people to say yes to being part of this team when he didn't even have any financial backing. He didn't have a studio space. What he had was his vision for what this brand and what his designs could be in the world. And so for you, what were the deciding factors for her in making that choice and making that leap with him, and what it was about him that really made her want to be part of that inner circle so early on?
I think when you're yourself someone who is really driven and, ready to give up everything for what you want to do, when you see that in someone else, you immediately want to jump on board. It seems to me that, that would make sense, other than obviously they had a very similar approach to style and design, and they were both craving for something new and more modern, and this idea of liberating women and in through what they were wearing, and rethinking what it is, what style is, and what clothes are, and what jewelry is. So obviously there was an aesthetic and a common, creative endeavor. But I think, when you recognize the same drive in someone as in yourself, you kind of, it's like falling in love. It's like this, you just say yes.
And with the runway moments where we see you and some of the other actors, displaying some of the designs, particularly early on, there's a real beautiful choreography behind those scenes. And so I was really fascinated in how the choreography and the motion and the movement and the blocking of those scenes came together.
Billy Beyond. That's who. Billy's a good friend of Dan, and he used to walk runways for women's fashion. Todd Odlam, and he looked incredible. And he choreographed all of the shows pretty much. So because he was there at a similar time, so he knew, it's completely different when you watch runway shows today, the way models walk down the runway and the way they walked down the runway back then. And everyone had a personality, everyone had their own thing, and so that's a lot of his work.
And when you look at all of the designs that she created over the years, what's really fascinating about it is that there's such a story behind the inspiration of every piece, and they're such tactile pieces, and they're really, really memorable. Once you see them, they're kind of seared into your mind. So were you looking a lot at the designs that she made? And if so, how was that giving you an eye into the way that she viewed the world as a creative?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I knew her designs before starting, but not as in depth as I dived into it a lot more after we started filming, or like when I got cast rather. And yes, like the one thing I had never, I've seen people with the heart in smaller pieces, but I had never really held, the cuffs or some of the other pieces. And there's something really tactile and organic about the way that she conceived and conceptualized those pieces. And she drew a lot from nature. She talks a lot about that, about how she's very inspired by nature. And yeah, I think it was kind of, I think her intention was to always simplify things, and you can see that in her style, in her personal style, and it informs a lot of how she lived her life as well. She ended up not really, she still had her apartment in New York until last year. She sold it, but she was living in a small town in a village, basically like a hamlet in Spain, that she completely renovated. And so she was very, like, definitely an iconoclast in her approach to a lot of things.
Yeah. And you yourself have also studied design and fashion and have had a career in modeling as well. And so what are some of the elements of her that you feel that you just really intrinsically understood about her because of your own background and your own work in those spaces as well?
I think, just the process of an artist is something that I understand, because as you said, I studied a lot of different things. I worked in fashion, I paint and write and a lot of other things, and I've always made things. So that process was something that felt very familiar to me, that I didn't really need to research so much. Obviously, every artist's process is different, but I understand that. And so I think that's definitely something that made me feel closer to her. And also, I didn't have success, like a modeling career. I wouldn't call that a career, but I did that. I did model, and I did do all these different things. And I think when you're that type of person, that you have, a sensibility for a lot of different things, that also is something that, we have in common, I think. So yeah, that helped
And one of the things that I loved in seeing about her in the show is how she knew her value, she knew her worth, she knew what she had to bring to the table. And there's a discussion when she's renegotiating her contract with Tiffany, where she knows exactly how much everything she designs costs to manufacture, what the markup is and how much money she's made them. But even earlier, when Halston's draping some fabric on her, she's the person to suggest, wearing her hair differently. So it's something that's always been inside of her. And so what was that like for you in terms of really bringing a woman to screen who just knew exactly what her value was in every single moment of that scenes, and how did that influence the way that you played her?
It's funny because that's not, I recognize that that's what comes out of it. That's not necessarily how I see it, because I don't always feel like I know my worth, or like, we all have insecurities or things like that, but I know what I don't like. And I know, when I know to, if I see something or have an instinct towards something that maybe someone else hasn't suggested yet, I will not keep my mouth shut about it. So, some people don't like that, but definitely, whether it was when I was modeling, or I always have an opinion about things, maybe sometimes too much for certain people's tastes, but I can understand feeling like you are part of the creative process, no matter what your role is, even if you're just the model in that moment when she, does the hair, you're the one wearing the clothes. So, and you have, knowing that it's not necessarily knowing that your opinion is valid. It's just, you can't help but share your opinion, I think. And that I definitely recognize myself in.
I also wanted to ask you about the costumes, even beyond the design that we see on the runway, because the costumes really tell such a story throughout the series in a whole. And one of the scenes that really seared into my mind was the moment where all of them are sitting in Halston's space on that all red couch, and you're all wearing black and red in different ways. And it really is one of the moments as well where all of the characters had more of a cohesiveness to their relationship and to their dynamic with each other. And we really get that sense from the outfits. And so what influence did the costumes have, not only in terms of who she was as a character, but in terms of thinking about the interpersonal relationships that she has with Halston and with the other characters around her through the choices that they were making?
Right. Well, I mean, Jeriana, the costume designer, is a brilliant genius. Definitely, you noticed, right? In that whole episode, all of us are wearing a lot of red and black. Each episode has kind of a different color scheme or color palette to what clothes we're wearing. And yes, it's meant to convey, a certain vibe or tension or whatever is going on at the time between the characters. So that definitely, I mean, costume, as much as hair and makeup, helps incredibly, like immensely, to really get in character and really understand and feel, like you were really slipping in the skin of someone else.
And you have so many wonderful scenes with Ewan McGregor, and there's such a beautiful complexity to watch within the relationship and the dynamic between the two of them. And like you said, it's a very unconventional love, but there is real love between the two of them. And did the two of you have a very similar approach and style as actors in the way that you like to develop characters, even down to how much you like to talk about certain decisions before you go into filming a scene, or the way that you want to really workshop and find the beat of it? Or were you kind of figuring each other out and then creating a new style together with each other?
I don't know if I don't really know if our approach is similar, because I don't know what, I mean, I know a lot of what Ewan's work, prior to build Halston's character was, but I think one thing that was really, really helpful for all of us, I think, was, and that's thanks to Dan, he really wanted to make sure that we felt like a crew, like us as actors. So we spent a lot of time, he took, before we started filming, he took us to all the original locations, and we had lunch together. And then one day we had a dinner at Dan's house. This is all pre-COVID, where I cooked for everyone and we spent some time together. And so this, and having been able to do that pre-COVID and during the after we had to shut down, and we stayed in touch with each other. We did a couple Zooms where we would do read-throughs and, kind of kept up with what was going on with one another. And so I think that really helped, having this real bond between us, specifically when we went back to into filming in those really crazy new conditions that were post COVID, protocol for filming. It really helped having that. And Ewan is someone who's incredibly generous, obviously incredibly talented and dedicated, and such an example of humility and generosity. It's you cannot help but try to be at that level. So definitely having him helped for sure. But I think we all became a little family, like a little odd family. And that's definitely, I think you can see that in the show.
And there's a scene within the series where we see the two of them, and it's almost like watching a couple fight and break up, and everything that they've been resenting or feeling or haven't said out loud over the years, or even the things that they have said out loud, is all coming to the surface. And the two of you play it with such beautiful emotions. The love is still there, the vulnerability is there, the hurt's there, the anger's there, leading all of the words. And so what was that journey of just really finding all of the different emotions that you wanted to pack into that scene to make it what it was?
Yeah, that was that. I think you're talking about the scene at the lunch scene at the beach. Yeah. What are you talking about? There's two big fights, but that was a really daunting scene, because it was the first scene we filmed when we got back after the really long break. So it was very, very loaded. And I think in a way that helped, because there was in us all this, confusion, expectations, all these feelings that were really there for us as actors. And then, I think, I don't know, like that I guess that was part of what helped for that. But yes, it was, those scenes were heartbreaking, because it's terrible watching these people that love one another and have done so much for one another, just rip each other apart for I don't know, it's always heartbreaking.
Yeah. And one of the things that we see throughout all of these characters in the show is also that exploration and that idea of when you're in a creative space, and that's where things come from within you, that you have to figure out what your voice is. And obviously we see that through Halston's design and trying to figure out what type of designer is he going to be, what sort of fabrics, what story does he want to tell, but we see it through Elsa and all of the other characters as well. And so I just wanted to kind of finish by asking you about your own journey and really figuring out the type of artist and storyteller and creative that you have wanted to become yourself within this industry.
Wow. Easy question to finish. I think it's all still a work in progress, for sure. I'm finally letting myself, allowing myself to want things and not just, not be scared of wanting those things. And, what motivated me always to be an actor I loved to perform when I was a kid, but it wasn't so much the performance part. It was more the working with certain creatives. And that's always what motivated me. And I think now I want to produce and write and direct. And because I want to be the one gathering all those creatives around me, whether I'm going to be acting in a project or just producing it, or perhaps, writing or directing or whatever. That to me is the most, the collaboration part has always been the most exciting. Working with people that, challenge you, people that, inspire you, people that, are not coming from totally different backgrounds or totally different, you know, have totally different aesthetics or views or sensitivity. Like that's what's interesting to me. That's definitely what keeps me interested in this.
I really loved watching your performance throughout the entire series. And based on everything that you just said, I'm so excited for all of the future projects that you're going to bring to us all. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.